Now, we were introduced last week to the beast, and I told you that the beast is the governments of the world, or the nations of the world. So, Jesus has his body. Now, this is the body of Satan, of the serpent, okay? The beast. I stood on the sandy beach. I saw a beast coming up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. On his horns he had 10 royal crowns and blasphemous titles on his heads. Remember, the woman that was seen had 12, but he has 10. And further on, we're going to see Jesus has many. Okay. And the beast that I saw resembled a leopard, but his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like that of a lion. And to him the dragon gave his might and power, his throne and great dominion. Now, we can see that almost every government in the world is included. Otherwise, they would worship Jesus. Okay? I don't know what you feel about America today. They've got a president that supposedly worships Jesus, but he's having a struggle with everything in the land. But any country in the world that does not have Jesus as the head, which is almost every one of them, has the beast. Okay? And one of his heads seemed to have a deadly wound, but his death stroke was healed. And the whole earth went after the beast in amazement and admiration. Now, some people think it's like Rome was overthrown, but then it came back to power or something. I don't look at those things. I think at the time of this writing, yes, Rome was the beast. Okay? But here in Canada, we have a different beast. They fell down and paid homage to the dragon because he had bestowed on the beast all his dominion and authority. They also praised and worshipped the beast, exclaiming, "Who is a match for the beast? Who can make war against him? Who is like the beast?" Almost every country in the world thinks that they're top in power, that nobody has any more power than they have. And the beast was given the power of speech, uttering boastful and blasphemous words. And he was given freedom to exert his authority and to exercise his will during the 42 months, 1,260 days, however you want to say it. And he opened his mouth to speak slanders against God, blaspheming his name and his abode, and those who live in heaven. He was further permitted to wage war against God's holy people. Remember, against the witnesses? We saw that. And to overcome them. We saw that they overcame at that time. And power was given him to extend his authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. just about wherever you go in the world, you'll find people serving the beast. Even in the churches in Kenya, they have what's called harambes, fundraisings, where harambe means people helping people. So they have these fundraisings for the church to maybe build the church or do something. And so they invite guests, and they invite politicians, because politicians like to go to any meeting there is. Like at a funeral, a politician would have been there to speak. And so they come to these things and they bring lots of money. Okay? And they give money trying to buy votes for the next time. And a pastor friend of mine.
That still happens in my country.
Yeah? Pastor friend of mine was having a fundraiser, and it was for a good thing to buy instruments for their church. They had probably the best choir I had ever heard. But they had 3 guitars, and between the 3 guitars, I think they had 6 strings. and the drums they have are like a drum with cowhide over it, but they were all ripped. And so he wanted to buy some instruments. So it was a good thing, because they were a good choir. So he came and invited me as one of the guests. And it turned out that Sunday, I couldn't go. And I said, "Do you have some other guests?" He said, "Oh yeah, we have this politician and that politician." I said, "I don't think you should trust in the politicians to do the work of the church." Mm-hmm. I said, "Besides, these 2 politicians you named are way far away from being a Christian." I said, "You just do it in your church, and you'll see how God blesses." And he went away from me angry. He told me years later, he's now a teacher in our Bible school, but he told me years later, he came to me because he thought I would give him the money to buy the instruments without even having a fundraiser. But I said, just pray and you trust God to provide. Mm-hmm. So anyways, the Sunday comes. Not one of the politicians showed up. Mm-hmm. So they went ahead with their fundraising, just people in the church. They got enough money to buy all the instruments and then help another church buy instruments.
Wow. That's awesome.
And he told me later, he said, "I would have never learned to have faith in God if you would have come and gave me the money." So these ones are being controlled by the government. And all the inhabitants of the earth will fall down in adoration and pay homage, every one whose name has not been recorded in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain from the foundations of the world. If anyone can hear, let him listen. Remember, right back in the first vision? Whoever leads into captivity will himself go into captivity. If anyone slays with the sword he must be slain. Herein is the patience and the faith and fidelity of the saints. Now here, listen to that. Patience. If you're dealing with governments, you need patience. Okay? I don't know if I told you about the time our church in Canada had sent us a generator, big generator, for our mission. And it got to Kenya, and you have to go through a lot of work to get something from the dock to your home. Okay? They have what's called forwarding companies. I think they have them here too, I don't know. But you have to go into the forwarding company with your papers, give it to them, and give some money, and then they'll pick it up for you. And I didn't want to pay any money to these people. So 6 months, and I had to drive 12 hours into the city to meet these people, and they kept saying, well, if you just leave us a little bit of cash, because you know, to get it off the dock, we have to pay some. I said, no, it's all paid for. And so finally, I went into the office of our member of parliament. And I said, who do I go to? Because he knows everybody. Who do I go to get this cleared? He said, it's been 6 months. It won't even be there. And what had happened was, when they were boxing this up in Cranbrook, they built a plywood box around it, but they forgot to put the battery in. So they cut a hole in the side of the box and just set a battery inside there.
Crazy.
And a dozen filters for it. Just sat them in there. I didn't know that. And so anyways, he told me, I'll take you to the office as a finance minister, or minister of finance. So he took me over there, showed me the office, and he said, now I have to go back for a meeting, but you go in there and see him. So I went in there, and it was about noon. And I told the secretary, I'm here to see the minister. I want to get my generator in, and I want to see if I could do it duty-free. And she said, okay. And she called on the phone to him. And I sat there, but I took my Bible along. And I read my Bible. 4 o'clock comes along, and the secretary said, well, he's gone home now. He had another tour. So come back tomorrow. So I got there at 8 o'clock in the morning. Read my Bible till 4 o'clock. Same thing. Come back tomorrow.
Wow.
3 days. And finally, at just 5 to 4 on the third day, the door opened, and here's the minister of finance, the second most powerful person in the country. He comes out and he said, you're sure a patient man. Come in here, what do you want? You see, he was waiting for me to pay a bribe. And so he filled in the papers, and when he stamped something, it's stamped. I had no duty to pay on it or anything. It was cleared by the Minister of Finance. So I went back to thank my MP, who was a Christian, by the way. He was a good, strong Christian. So he said, now, how are you getting it from Mombasa? I said, I have no idea. Well, he owned a trucking company. So he said, give me your papers. He said, if it's still there, I'll pick it up for you. And a few days later, a truck comes into my yard, and he has this generator on it. The hole in the side, the battery's still sitting there. The filters are still sitting there. There was so much bird manure on top, you could tell it was sitting there a long time. And he told me, he said, on the way here, there's some hills like this in Kenya. They were coming up this one hill, and they had to go so slow that the thieves jumped on the truck. And they unloaded everything they could. his spare tire, everything else he was carrying on the truck. But they couldn't move this big generator. So from Mombasa to our place, the only thing that was left in the truck was my generator.
Wow.
He said, God really loves you and wants you to have this generator.
That's hilarious.
But you see, I could have gone in the first day with money, and maybe the generator wouldn't have been there. But all of this was a trial for me to see if I was going to remain faithful. I'm sure of it. Okay. So, this beast wants you to be connected with them. And some people in the church are connected to the government. I told you the one church I went to, the one I got saved into and went to, never ever gave out tax receipts. They said, we don't want to be connected to the government. If you give here, it's only because you want to give freely to God. And I was a bookkeeper. I know that sometimes there were checks for $50,000 come into the church. People didn't care because they were giving it to God, not for a receipt. No, I'm not saying you're wrong if you give receipts, or I'm just saying that's how they were. They didn't want to be connected to the government at all. So he has complete power. The governments have complete power in the country, especially in some corrupt countries. You know, well, some of our Western countries are corrupt too, different ways. 7 heads, fullness of government. That's what it's showing. Not the fullness of God, but the fullness of government. All major governments in the world are included. So what is it showing us? The devil has to have helpers. And we're going to see further on that the devil's kingdom doesn't work. Okay? Because everyone thinks they're the head. So pretty soon they're going to fight. But for now, he's using these ones to do his work. And they blaspheme. They speak against God. And they say we can make it without God. That's what the main blasphemy is. I can do it without God. I don't need God. The devil tried to make Jesus one of the heads. You know, you want to make him king. Jesus said, I have a different kingdom than what you know of.
You reminded me, just popped in my head when they said with the Titanic, even God can't sink this ship.
Oh,
You see, that's what people say. God can't touch this. You know.
Who is like this? Nobody's as powerful as this. And in Psalm 2, they were cursing God. In Genesis 10, 8 to 12, we hear about a man that we're going to hear about further on in this book. Nimrod. He was the first to be a mighty man on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of the land he went forth to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Resen, which is between Nineveh and Calah. All these, the great city. So, he was the first one to start his own kingdom in the Bible. And some people look at that, oh, he was a great hunter before the Lord. That's not a good thing. Okay. We had in Kenya people naming their children Nimrod. I said, don't do that. He's not a good person. A hunter before the Lord he hunted the Lord's people. Okay. He put to death the Lord's people. Remember, God had to send Jonah to Nineveh to ask them to repent. He's worshipped throughout all time. People worship him today. Okay? I'm going to get into a little bit more in another chapter about how we all worship him. Okay? Whether you know it yet or not. Has anybody ever heard about Nimrod?
The only thing we've heard is like Nimrod is now used as a swear word.
Yeah, I can believe it. But not by some people.
Back in England, it's a slang for
Yeah.
it's not a nice name.
Yeah. It's because one of his names that he was worshipped by was, I think I put it in the note, Atlas. Remember the picture of Atlas holding the world? Okay, that was Nimrod. Okay, in one of his ways of being worshipped. This is what it's talking about, nations coming against God in Psalms 2, raging against God. If it's powerful, it must be right. That's what we see in the church. Some people choose Saul over David because they're powerful. They have money. They're head above everyone else. I'm so glad I was short, bald. That wouldn't have been the choice of anyone. You understand? But that's how people choose people.
Yeah.
Nimrod must be good. Only a few verses talked about him, but all you can examine these cities that he started. Babel built the tower. The kingdoms of the world have become the kingdoms of our God and his Christ, said in the last vision. The devil was defeated. He was thrown out of heaven. He come against the woman, and even the earth swallowed up the lies that were thrown. So he needed a helper. He gets this little beast. Even though he was defeated on the cross, he still goes through other ways to get at us. In our baptism, I don't know about you, but when I got baptized, I had no idea what I was doing. The night I accepted Jesus in the church, Nobody led me in prayer or anything else. And one of the elders came to me and said, "Can I come and speak to you about baptism?" I said, "No, you can't." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm a thief. I have some repenting to do before." I didn't know what baptism was, but right then I knew I couldn't be baptized till I made some things right. Okay? So in baptism, repentance goes along with it. But it's cutting off not only from the devil, but from the world,
Amen.
from the beast. And we're going to soon see a little beast. That's what baptism is. When I started learning some things, I knew why the Spirit prompted me to say no. Because the way their baptism was, they were very strict. It had to be a certain way. And actually, when they baptized me, they bashed my head on the side of the tank. But
And then he goes.
but we have to understand it's cutting off.
Yeah.
It's identifying with the death and resurrection of Christ. Again, overcoming by the blood of Jesus. Okay? It's, Paul tells us to respect the nation. But only when they want us to follow the ways of God. If they want us to follow a way that isn't right, we don't obey them.
That's right.
So, we are to be good citizens. But, even as this is happening, the church is growing. Okay?
Amen.
The devil couldn't defeat on his own. He couldn't defeat with the beast. So now he needs another helper. A little helper, verse 11. Then I saw another beast. But watch, this one isn't coming out of the sea. It's coming out of the lamb. He had 2 horns like a lamb. And he spoke like a dragon. Okay? He doesn't sound like the lamb that was slain.
Right.
He sounds like a dragon. I've heard some preachers that sound like dragons. I don't know how their voice laughs.
Not saying that.
I'm glad I don't go to any of your churches. 'Cause I don't know how your pastors preach. He exerts all the power and right of control of the former beast in the beast's presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell upon it to exalt
First beast.
and the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed, and to worship him. He performs great signs. Okay? Now, I'm giving you a hint. He's in the church. Okay? This little beast is in the church. He's performing great signs, even making fire fall from the sky to the earth in men's sight. And because of the signs which he is allowed to perform, get it?
Right.
Allowed to perform. in the present of the first beast, he deceives those who inhabit the earth, commanding them to erect a statue in the likeness of the beast, who was wounded by the small sword and still lived. And he is permitted to impart the breath of life into the image of the beast. Okay? So that the statue of the beast could actually talk and cause to be put to death those who now bow down and worship the image of the beast. Also, he compels all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked with an inscription on the right hand and on their forehead. Remember, what does that mean? Right hand?
How?
No, this is your fellowship.
Fellowship, okay, right now.
Who
Fellowship.
you
Direction.
and
Right hand.
how you work. Okay? And the head, how you think.
Wow.
Okay? So that no one will have power to buy. Remember in the breaking of the seals? They didn't have the power to buy unless they had the mark.
Right.
Okay? It's just a form of persecution coming. Have the name of the beast or the number of his name. Some people think that you're going to get a number and put under.
Chip.
Nah,
No.
that's not what it is.
No.
It's who are you keeping friends with,
Yeah.
and what is your thought? Here is discernment. Now, see, with the government, it took patience. But with this one, who is now in the church, it takes discernment. Let anyone who has intelligence calculate the number of the beast, for it is a human number. His number is 666.
What does that mean?
Any ideas?
Numbers.
Hey, you said it before. Man.
Numbers.
Man.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, like, why is that number of man? 6.
6 is the number of man. He
Six.
was
Oh yeah, 6.
created on the
six.
6th day.
Never mind.
Okay?
Yeah.
And
Go back to.
Satan now has his Trinity.
Yeah.
I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
3.
666.
Yeah.
Man, man, man.
Oh, man.
So this lamb can even do wonders. But remember, he knocked on the door and Jesus said, "Go away, I didn't know you." But we even prophesied in your name. We did miracles.
Right.
I never knew you.
Wow.
Okay? That's who this is talking about. Man is at the center. There are some people have ministered. I remember when I was a fairly young Christian, this evangelist came to town. And he was even praying for people with bad teeth, and they were getting gold fillings. Now, I don't know why God didn't just replace the tooth, but give them a gold filling. But anyways, there were people testified of this happening. His meeting was growing and growing and growing. Then one night, it came time for the meeting, and the pastor that was hosting didn't get there on time. And this man got so angry because there was nobody there to take the offering that he wouldn't even speak because there was no offering taken. Man-centered ministry. It was nothing to do with God.
There's ministers or speakers who, if you won't give them a certain amount, they won't come.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was saved through Dave Wilkerson's ministry. I think I told you. He's now a great teacher of the word. He goes anywhere. Well, he's getting old like me, a little older. He's had a heart attack too, but his last one wasn't as good as mine. So. But a friend of his that was saved at the same time, I don't know what he charges now, but 20 years ago when this friend was telling me, he was charging $10,000, or he wouldn't even come to your church, just to come and give his testimony.
Oh my goodness.
That is bizarre. That is cool.
And so this one is going to be in another vision, be called the Antichrist. Okay? But now he's just a little lamb that wasn't slain. Okay? But he will be known as the Antichrist. And Antichrist doesn't mean especially against Christ. It's instead of Christ. Okay? The devil knows Jesus' name.
Yeah.
They won't even say that Jesus doesn't exist. But look at me. Look at my lamb. Look at this one. Okay? Nimrod, with one of his titles, was Zoroaster. That can be a whole teaching on the Zoroaster. But what it means, the seed of woman. Okay. The Chaldeans called him Zoroaster, the seed of woman.
It's interesting because there's one of the religions back home. It's actually called Zoroastrians.
That's come from him.
Wow. Okay. Now I know.
It's a very big religion
Yeah.
in Middle East. So, it's saying, here is your anointed one.
Yeah.
The anointed one is Messiah.
Yeah.
Okay? The governments of the world are connected to this one. Okay? And remember, he's in the church. He's not in the world. But if you listen to him, you'll be led to the demon fold, not the sheepfold. Okay? Jesus called them in Matthew 7:15, wolves in sheep's clothing. 2 Corinthians 11:14, the devil as an angel of light. Okay? They were all pointing to this person. And this person isn't just a person. You see, when I mentioned Nimrod, he was the first. Okay? And they had power from the first beast. So even the government will give these people power. I remember one time there was a certain evangelist coming to Uganda to have a crusade. The president, who was not a Christian, met him at the airport, gave him a limousine to use while he was in the country, gave him trucks to haul his equipment to have his evangelism. Beware of church leaders who are connected to the government.
Spilling all the beans here.
It doesn't, things are different here in Canada. But some of you come from other places in Canada. You know how it is in most of the world. Okay? I have some good friends that are are politicians, but they're Christian too. We had a policeman come through our school because they wanted him to be a educated chaplain for the police force. And he came to our school, and the enemy didn't want him there. Didn't want him going back and infecting the police force. Because the police force, other than school teachers, is one of the most corrupt organizations in Kenya. They die at a rapid speed from AIDS. School teachers are number one, and then the police force. But this policeman came, and he came down with something like, I forget the name now, where you go spastic and epilepsy. He destroyed so much of the furniture in the Bible school. And we had people praying for him. And finally, by his third year, I mean, he couldn't even, after a while, he couldn't even be in the choir in the school or anything because they didn't know what he'd do.
Wow.
But by the time he graduated, he was a class speaker, totally set free.
Praise the Lord.
And he went out and started speaking to those policemen.
Praise the Lord.
He only lived a year and a half after he left the school. He was doing evangelism in this one city. And he went to rest on his bed, and they found him laying there with his Bible on his chest. Died. Just a young man. But in that time, I went to his funeral. The police department asked me to be speaker at his funeral. And all of the people, there were hundreds of policemen came and gave testimony how he touched their lives.
Amen.
And they got saved,
Amen.
got delivered from
Thank you, Lord.
the things they were into. You see, so when you think of being connected to the government, we need people in the government that can do that. We need people in positions that can do those things. Okay? See you next week.
Bye, Lord.
But if we're linked to the government, you see, there's some people that want something from them, and they want something from you. You want the money that they can bring, but they want the votes that they can get. I was in this one church speaking one time, and it was just before election time, not long, and I just got up there to speak, and a politician and his aides came into the church, sat down, and I just waved at him. And I went on, and finally the pastor of the church stood up and he said, "We have to stop. We have to introduce the politician." I said, "No, we don't." He said, "But I'm the pastor. I'm going to have him come up and speak." I said, "No. I'm in the middle of the message, and God gave me the message." That politician thanked me after. But on his way out, he handed the pastor some money anyways. He said he got away quick. He could go to another church now. And he got money, or gave money and got votes there. He might have got votes in the church, but I wouldn't let him get up and speak. We submit to the authority of God,
Amen.
not the authority of man. Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Okay? We don't follow anything that isn't looking like Christ.
That's right.
Even this small lamb that looks like a lamb, but he doesn't have his throat cut. He's sounding like a dragon. Peter said, we must obey God, not men. And he was talking to the church leaders at that time.
That's right.
They were trying to tell him to stop using the name Jesus. So it's even church governments. Okay? So, we have to look and see, use discernment, wisdom. Anybody that speaks in your church, anybody that they have this tradition out in Kenya. A visitor comes to ask them to speak. The worst thing you can do. I teach them in our school out there, don't do that. You don't know who this guy is or what he's going to say.
That's true.
And you probably don't correct him if he does say something wrong. I was in a church one time and this guy stood up and he was giving glory to Satan. Okay? And I was in a friend's church. And finally, I stood up and said, can you sit down, please? He said, no. And the pastor looked at me sort of strange. I said, no, sit down. I said, we're here to give glory to Jesus, not to the devil. He ran to the back of the church, screaming blasphemies. And then he went out the back door, and about 4 or 5 young ladies got up and went with him. Found out later he was sleeping with these ladies in the church. And the rest of the people started repenting in the church. I didn't even have to preach. They just come forward and started repenting. You know, we have to look and see if there's a scar or if it's talking like a beast. Okay. We have to see if it's directing us to the sheepfold or to the dragon's den. Okay? That takes wisdom, discernment. If you deal with the government, you need patience. But you deal with this little beast, you need wisdom and discernment. It's very hard when you're in somebody else's church to tell someone to sit down. But we have that authority.
Yeah.
Make sure you're right. Make sure you're right. Because that man had been invited by so many churches to come. Because wherever he went, a lot of people came. Okay, they were listening to the stories. Humanism, self-centeredness, things that make us feel good. First time when I came back to Canada one time, went into this church down in Ontario. And when you're going into the church, you go through a line and you get coffee and donuts. I thought, what is this church? What's going on here? And people were talking all through the church. And even when the speaker got up, nobody cared. They just continued their talking and drinking coffee and eating donuts. I looked around and I couldn't see the lamb that was slain in the place. It was all about me, me, me.
Playing church.
I. If it feels good, do it. That's the message from this little beast, this little lamb. So being a Christian is standing up for what's right. Standing up for these things. You have to have patience at times, but you have to have wisdom. In the church, when I have a hard time letting people lay hands on me unless I know them. Okay? You don't know what spirit they're of. You will get persecution.
The pastor that came for the pastor you brought
Oh,
from Maryland,
yeah.
he said that too. He said, don't. He's like, I stopped letting people lay hands on people in the church because we don't know what spirit
That's right.
they carry. Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good because, you know,
Yes.
when you stand up against these things, you will get persecuted. Okay? You won't be friends with everyone. The dragon has his two helpers. Okay? The beast and the little beast. The beast comes out of the seas. The seas talks about, meaning the world. Okay? Systems. The one coming out of the land is out of the church, in the church. Okay? Or it's a alternative church. Okay? It might look like a church, it sounds like a church when they're singing, but it's an alternative. They lead you somewhere else. If you're in a church that's connected to the government, you can have patience and maybe you'll hear some good things. But if you're in a church that's connected to the second one, get out of there. Don't stay because you can't stand up in a place like that. Okay?
Explain that again, please.
Hey?
Explain that.
Explain that?
Yeah, because yeah.
If you're in the church where the little beast is, he will look good. Like it says, he can even do miracles. So people will follow them. So it's very hard to come against that in the church.
Yes.
Very hard. So what I say is get
Get
out.
out.
Unless God gives you a specific task to challenge that. Okay? Get out of it. Because you will not be fed good food there. All the food you get will be corrupt. Okay? Any word that comes to you will be corrupt word. Okay? They might even use the Bible. They might even use Scripture. But you can use Scripture to almost say anything you want.
Yeah.
You know that. You take it out of context and things. So we have seen that God is fighting against these. And unless you're called to do it, you stand up for what's right. But unless you're called to do that, just leave. Go find some. There's lots of other churches. Lots of good places. You don't need to go there. So we're basically seeing the same thing over and over, only it's going into more depth. Okay? In the first we saw Christ in the middle of his church. Okay? And the church in the middle of the world. And then we saw the Lamb on the throne. and then we heard the trumpets. Then these ones in the church are being revealed. Okay? So God is coming against this Trinity. In the next vision, we're going to see some more of the same. Okay? We're going to see just at a different angle and a little more. We're going to see the one who comes riding on the white horse soon. We're going to see the Antichrist coming and being revealed. Okay? We're going to see these very soon. But in each one, we will see that the church is protected. Remember, they're on the wings of eagles. They're taken and protected and fed. And if in that church, if food comes from wormwood, the doctrine of demons comes, it won't stay. It can't stay. It'll be recognized. Okay? So, we will go on to the next vision next time. And so I think it's chapter 14, 15, 16 for those ones. Read those over. I like to... hey?
Which book?
Revelation.
That's a good one.
She's been having a good time in Jamaica.
That's where she was at.
How long were you in Jamaica?